Rude IC agent profiles black man at airport and instantly regrets it. It began on a Tuesday morning at JFK International Airport. The kind of morning where the terminal feels like a small city. Coffee machines hissing like angry cats. Rolling suitcases rumbling over tile. The air thick with the scent of overpriced breakfast sandwiches. The sunlight spilled through the massive glass wall, bouncing off metal beams and travelers' faces. People hurried, heads down, boarding passes clenched like lifelines, and then everything slowed. Because at gate 47, an IC agent's voice cut through the hum like a blade scraping glass. "Sir, you, step over here." Heads turned. Some curious, others annoyed. The man he'd singled out, tall, well-dressed, dark skin catching the sunlight, had just been in line to board. His passport still in his hand, his carry-on balanced neatly at his side. But the agent didn't see neatness or order. He didn't see the calm, measured way the man stood. What he saw was someone to check and intimidate. This is where you should lean in, because what you're about to hear will make you angry, and then it'll make you cheer. If you're new here, hit that subscribe button, like this video, and stay till the end, because this story isn't just about an airport delay. It's about how a man with quiet dignity can dismantle an entire wall of arrogance without ever raising his voice. The IC agent was mid-40s, buzz-cut, mirrored sunglasses that reflected back your own discomfort. His jaw moved like he was grinding his teeth even when he wasn't. A name tag read Agent K. Jansen, the kind of name that sounded like it belonged on a badge that had never known doubt. The man he'd stopped was Marcus Reed, 36 years old, wearing a slate gray suit that looked tailored but not flashy, with a laptop bag slung over one shoulder. His face carried the kind of calm that made you wonder if he'd been through storms you couldn't imagine. "Problem, officer?" Marcus asked, his tone even. "Routine check," Jansen replied, though his eyes narrowed in a way that didn't feel routine at all. "Step aside. We need to verify your travel details." Marcus glanced at the boarding line, now slowing to watch. "My documents are in order," he said, holding out his passport. Jansen didn't take it. "Step over here. There's a certain power in volume, but there's a different kind of power in public humiliation." And Jansen was using it well. People shifted uncomfortably, their eyes darting between Marcus and the agent. The message was clear. This man looked suspicious. Marcus stepped to the side, not because he was afraid, but because he'd learned long ago that dignity sometimes meant picking your battles. Jansen began his routine questions. "Where are you coming from? Why were you there? Who did you meet?" The questions weren't unusual, but the tone, like every answer was already a lie, made Marcus's jaw tighten. "You were in Brussels for business?" Jansen said, looking at Marcus like he'd just claimed to be royalty. "What kind of business exactly?" Marcus hesitated, not because he didn't have an answer, but because he could already see the shape of this game. Jansen smirked. "You pause like that when you're lying?" The air around them grew heavier. Travelers shifted further away, but they still watched, pretending they weren't. Someone pulled out their phone, the subtle angle of the camera lens telling Marcus this was already being recorded. Marcus answered, his voice steady. "I was attending a policy summit on international trade compliance." Jansen gave a short, sharp laugh. "Right. And I'm the president." That's when Marcus noticed something. The agent wasn't just suspicious. He was enjoying this. The way some people enjoy watching ants scramble after you kick their hill. The agent leaned closer. "You don't look like someone who attends international trade summits. You look like someone who, well, let's just say I know the type." Marcus's eyes met his. Calm, measured, but deep inside, something cold flickered. And this is where most people would have snapped back, raised their voice, made a scene. Marcus didn't. He understood something vital, that silence can be louder than rage if you hold it long enough. But as the questioning dragged on, Jansen's tone sharpened. He accidentally stepped closer, forcing Marcus back. He flipped through the passport like it was a prop in a bad magic trick, shaking his head at each page as though the stamps themselves were suspect. When Marcus reached for his boarding pass, Jansen put a firm hand on his chest. Not so fast. The crowd's murmur grew louder. You could feel the divide. Half thought Marcus must have done something. The other half saw exactly what was happening. Then, Jansen said it. The line that made Marcus's jaw clench harder than it had in years. "You know, we catch a lot of people with stories like yours. Travel all over, fancy suits, but underneath? Nothing but lies. I can smell it a mile away. It wasn't just what he said, it was the way he said it. As if Marcus's presence here, dressed well, traveling for business, was an insult to the natural order. And Marcus realized Jansen didn't actually care about the truth. He cared about putting him in his place. Little did Jansen know, the place Marcus truly belonged was a lot higher than he imagined. But that part, we're not there yet. Because first, Marcus had to decide whether to play along or quietly set in motion a lesson that would haunt this agent long after the terminal's noise faded. The agent gestured to a roped-off area near the wall. We'll continue this in secondary screening. Could take a while. Hope you didn't have anywhere important to be. And Marcus, with the smallest of smiles, replied, Actually, Agent Jansen, I do. What he said next would not only shift the energy in the room, but plant the first seed of a reversal so sharp, Jansen wouldn't see it coming until it was too late. Marcus's words hung in the air. Actually, Agent Jansen, I do. They were calm, unhurried. The kind of words that didn't sound like a threat until you realized they carried weight. Jansen narrowed his eyes, trying to decide whether Marcus had just made his job harder or if this was simply bravado. We'll see about that, he said, pushing the rope aside and gesturing toward a small, windowless room near the back of the concourse. Inside, the walls were a shade of beige that only existed in government buildings. A table sat in the middle, metal legs scraped and dented from years of chairs banging against them. 2 chairs, 1 camera in the corner, its red light blinking steadily. Marcus set his bag down. Jansen didn't offer him a seat. You can stand, he said. Won't be long if you're honest. Marcus didn't move. I'll stand, he replied evenly. But it will be long. Because you've already decided what you think about me. The agent's jaw worked again. I decide based on facts. Marcus gave a small smile. No, you decide based on stories you've already told yourself. For a moment, the room was so quiet you could hear the hum of the fluorescent light above them. Jansen broke it. Let's go over this again. Brussels. For days. Who paid for your trip? My organization, Marcus said. What organization? Marcus didn't answer right away. Not because he didn't want to, but because he could see that Jansen was already dismissing whatever he said. And there was a strange power in making someone wait. When Marcus finally spoke, his voice was lower. The International Trade Ethics Council. Jansen gave a short, mocking laugh. Sounds made up. Marcus tilted his head slightly. I'm sure it does to you. And right there, something in Jansen shifted, not doubt, but irritation. Like he was playing chess and suddenly realized his opponent wasn't moving the pawns the way he expected. He opened Marcus's laptop bag without asking. Inside were neatly organized folders, a sleek laptop, and a thick booklet with the title embossed in gold. Global Ethics Summit 2025, Brussels, Belgium. Jansen flipped through it with the air of someone looking for a typo to prove it was fake. So you're telling me, he said, you flew to Europe for ethics? He let the word drip with sarcasm, as though it was something only naive people cared about. Marcus didn't flinch. I flew to Europe to help enforce international compliance laws that keep global trade from being exploited. But I suppose that's not the story you want to hear. Jansen leaned forward, placing both hands on the table. Here's the story I want to hear, who you really are. Because guys like you don't just pop up in places like that. And if you think a nice suit and a fancy conference name are going to get you through here without answers. The door opened. A young TSA supervisor stepped in, holding a tablet. Agent Jansen, she said, her voice low. You're going to want to see this. Jansen took the tablet, glancing at it with disinterest until his brow furrowed. Then furrowed again. His eyes flicked up to Marcus, then back to the screen. Marcus stayed silent, letting the moment breathe. The supervisor hesitated. Should I? No. Leave us? Jansen said quickly, shoving the tablet back into her hands. But the tightness in his voice gave him away. When she closed the door, Marcus spoke, his tone almost conversational. You found something, didn't you? Jansen sat back in his chair. I found inconsistencies. Marcus chuckled softly. Or maybe you found out I've been somewhere you didn't expect. Sitting at tables you don't think I belong at. Signing agreements that cross more borders in a week than you've seen in your life. The agent's hand twitched against the arm of his chair. You think you're better than me? Marcus's gaze was steady. No, I think I've done things you can't imagine. And I think you're about to make a mistake you can't undo. Outside the small window in the door, two figures appeared. One wore a navy suit, the other a black dress uniform heavy with insignia. Both walked with the kind of posture that made people step out of their way without realizing it. They knocked once, firmly. Jansen hesitated, then opened the door. The man in the suit stepped in first, his presence filling the room before he even spoke. "Agent Jansen," he said, voice like steel wrapped in velvet. "We need to speak with Mr. Reed privately." Jansen blinked. "Sir, I'm in the middle of—" "That wasn't a request," the man said. Marcus didn't move, but inside, a quiet satisfaction bloomed. This was the part Jansen wasn't going to see coming. Because the man in the suit wasn't just anyone, and his connection to Marcus was about to turn this cramped beige room into the stage for the first crack in Jansen's armor. And then Marcus spoke, for words that made Jansen's face lose all its color. Marcus let the silence stretch until even the fluorescent light's hum seemed louder. Then he looked straight at Agent Jansen, his voice calm, but carrying an unmistakable edge. "Good to see you again, Director Vaughn," Marcus said, nodding at the man in the navy suit. The agent in the black dress uniform stepped forward, her gaze sweeping over Jansen like she was assessing a rookie's mistake. "Mr. Reed," she said with clipped respect, "your presence is needed in conference room C immediately. The delegation has been waiting." Jansen blinked, trying to process the shift. "Delegation?" he repeated, like the word was in a foreign language. Marcus reached into his laptop bag, slowly, deliberately, and pulled out a dark leather folder embossed with gold lettering. He placed it on the table and slid it toward Jansen. The agent hesitated, then flipped it open. Inside was an identification card with the U.S. State Department seal, Marcus's name in bold, and a title that made Jansen's mouth go dry. Senior Policy Advisor, International Trade and Compliance Division. Underneath, in smaller print, were the words, Special Security Clearance, Level 4. Jansen stared. "You work for the State Department?" Marcus's tone was steady. "Work with, not for. My position allows me to operate independently while representing U.S. interests abroad, which is exactly what I was doing in Brussels until I got pulled into a room for a routine check." The word routine hung in the air like a dare. Vaughn took a step closer to Jansen. "Agent, do you have any idea who you've been detaining for the last 20 minutes? Jansen's jaw tightened. "I was doing my job." "No," Vaughn replied, voice sharp now. "You were profiling, and you were about 2 questions away from causing an international incident." Marcus didn't gloat. He didn't smirk. He simply gathered his passport, his boarding pass, and his laptop, sliding them into his bag with the care of a man who knew the value of control. But just before leaving, he paused and looked back at Jansen. "You assumed I didn't belong. You assumed I couldn't possibly be where I am. But here's the thing, Agent," he leaned in slightly. "I'm not the one whose career is about to be questioned." The words landed like a gavel strike. Vaughn motioned toward the door. "Let's go, Mr. Reed." As they stepped out into the terminal, Marcus noticed something. The phone cameras from earlier were still rolling. Passengers who had watched the confrontation now had their eyes fixed on him, whispers trailing in their wake. The story was no longer just between him and Jansen. They moved quickly through the concourse, past security, and into a private hallway that led to the conference wing. The air here felt different, cooler, quieter, lined with framed photographs of past diplomatic delegations. When they entered conference room C, the atmosphere shifted again. Around the long table sat men and women in tailored suits, some with earpieces, others with binders full of documents. Flags from multiple countries stood in the corner. Vaughn gestured to the empty seat at the head of the table. "Mr. Reed, please." As Marcus sat, one of the delegates leaned forward. "We were just about to discuss the enforcement protocols. I believe you have the final draft." Marcus slid a flash drive across the table. "Everything you need is on there, including the revisions from Brussels." For the next 20 minutes, the room was filled with high-level talk about sanctions, compliance loopholes, and trade route security. Marcus spoke with authority, his voice steady, his knowledge precise. Not once did anyone in that room doubt his expertise. But in the back of his mind, he knew the incident with Jansen wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Because men like that didn't let go quietly, especially when they'd been exposed. As the meeting wrapped, Vaughn leaned toward him. "We'll handle Jansen internally. You have my word." Marcus nodded, but he also knew that sometimes the system protected its own. And if Jansen decided to push back, A knock interrupted his thoughts. A junior staffer entered, looking pale. "Mr. Reed, you might want to see this." She held up a tablet, and on the screen was a breaking news alert. Viral video. IC agent detains senior State Department official at JFK. Below it, a shaky phone recording played. Jansen's voice, sharp and dismissive, followed by the moment Vaughn entered. The clip was already at 2.3 million views. Marcus looked at Vaughn. Vaughn looked at Marcus. And then the staffer's voice dropped to a whisper. "There's more. Someone leaked your other file." Marcus froze. "What file?" She swallowed. "The classified one." Marcus's eyes locked on the staffer. "Show me." She hesitated, glancing at Vaughn. He gave a curt nod. "Do it." The staffer swiped the screen, and a new document appeared. It wasn't stamped with the usual confidential. This one was marked in red, classified, eyes only. Beneath it, a heading. Operation Halcyon, lead negotiator, Marcus D. Reed. Vaughn muttered under his breath. How the hell did this get out? Marcus kept reading. The document outlined details about a covert international trade sting, one designed to expose a network of shell companies funding illicit arms deals under the cover of shipping agricultural equipment. The sting had been running for 18 months, and Marcus had been the public face of nothing while quietly orchestrating everything. If this leaked, the people whose money he'd just frozen in Brussels wouldn't just be angry. They'd be coming for him. Marcus's voice was calm, but there was steel underneath. Where is this circulating? The staffer's throat bobbed. Not the mainstream news yet, but it's on a few encrypted forums. The kind that doesn't take long to spill over. Vaughn's jaw tightened. We need to get you into secure transport now. Marcus nodded, but his mind was already working faster than the conversation. If this was on those forums, someone had fed it there. This wasn't a random leak, it was a message. And the timing, just after the confrontation with Jansen. His eyes narrowed. Vaughn, I want the internal logs. Who accessed my file in the last 72 hours? Vaughn gave a grim look. You think this came from inside? I know it did, Marcus said. Before Vaughn could answer, the conference room door burst open. Two security officers rushed in, scanning the room with urgency. One of them addressed Vaughn. Sir, we have a situation at the south entrance. What kind of situation? The officer's voice was tense. Someone just breached the restricted area, asking for Mr. Reed by name. The room froze. Vaughn's eyes flicked to Marcus. You have enemies overseas. None of them should even know you're here. Marcus stood, his expression unreadable. Then whoever's here isn't just an enemy. They're making this personal. The officers gestured toward the exit. We need to move you to a secure wing now. They hurried down a narrow service corridor, their footsteps echoing. The air here smelled faintly of concrete and metal, the bowels of the airport most travelers never saw. As they approached a reinforced door, Marcus's instinct screamed. He slowed, glancing back. Why are we heading this way? The secure wing is north, not south. One of the officers didn't answer. The other gave a faint smile that wasn't friendly. Marcus stopped. Who sent you? The smile widened. And in that moment, Marcus realized these weren't Vaughn's men. Marcus froze in that dim corridor, his senses sharpening. The fake officer's smile had that same predatory satisfaction he'd seen earlier in Jansen's eyes. Only this time, the stakes were far beyond humiliation. This was about survival. The taller one stepped closer. Mr. Reed, we can do this the easy way, or... Marcus cut him off. The easy way would be you telling me who sent you before I make you regret the harder one. It was enough of a pause for Marcus to catch it, the faint bulge under the shorter man's jacket. Not TSA issue. Not airport security. Something far more dangerous. Before they could react, Marcus shifted his weight, pivoted, and slammed the taller one against the wall. The man grunted, and the shorter one reached for his weapon, only to find Vaughn stepping out from behind a service pillar, his own sidearm drawn. Step away from him, Vaughn barked. The imposters froze. Within seconds, real airport security swarmed in, weapons raised, forcing the two men to the ground. As their wrists were cuffed, one of them spat in Marcus's direction. You should have stayed in Brussels. Vaughn's jaw tightened. We'll find out who sent them. But Marcus didn't need to guess. He'd played in this world long enough to know when a leak wasn't just revenge, it was an attempted handover. Someone had been paid to make sure he didn't leave the airport alive. Back in the secure wing, Marcus finally let out the breath he'd been holding. Vaughn slid a tablet across the table. You were right. Access logs show the leak came from an IC terminal 37 minutes after your confrontation with Agent Jansen. Marcus leaned back, eyes closing briefly in grim recognition. So this wasn't just profiling. He was looking for leverage. Not anymore, Vaughn said. The viral video has already reached the State Department. The Director of Homeland Security called me personally. Jansen's been placed on administrative leave pending a full investigation. Marcus didn't smile, but there was a quiet satisfaction in his tone. Justice has its own pace. Sometimes it walks. Sometimes it runs. Before he left, Marcus drafted a brief public statement, careful not to reveal operational details, but clear about the principle. It ended with one line. Assumptions are the most dangerous weapons we carry. That evening, as he finally boarded his flight, hours late but alive, Marcus passed by passengers still whispering about the viral video. Some smiled at him. Others nodded, as if to say we saw what happened, and we saw you win without shouting. High above the Atlantic, with city lights shrinking below, Marcus thought about how the day could have ended differently. How one man's arrogance had almost opened the door to something far worse. And how, in the end, holding your ground could be louder than any raised voice. By the time he landed, Jansen's face was plastered across news outlets. Not as the man who caught a threat, but as the man who became the threat. And Marcus? He went straight back to work, unshaken, because people like him didn't get to stop. The stakes were too high. This story is a reminder that power used carelessly will always meet its match in truth. That dignity isn't weakness, and that the quietest person in the room might be the one carrying the most weight. If this story moved you, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who believes in standing tall against injustice. Because the more we tell these stories, the harder it becomes for prejudice to hide.